Hello there, everyone. My name is Jimmy Mack, and welcome back to the 10th Academic Podcast. This is going to be the NS2 textbook Maritime History, Chapter 3, The Growth of American Sea Power. Now, at first, the U.S. overseas trading was having a bit of trouble because the British government issued a series of orders in council, which is basically some royal decrees, that were designed to make it as hard as possible for Americans to do business in Europe purely out of spite because we just beat them in a war. Because of this, we started doing trade in the Mediterranean, but we were getting harassed by Barbary pirates, or pirates from the Barbary states, which are Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli. Algiers is now Algeria, and Tunis is now Tunisia, as well as Tripoli is now Libya, but that's what they were called at the time. And so we were getting harassed by pirates there, and so we basically just started paying bribes and ransoms to them in order to let them leave us alone so we could do our business over in the Mediterranean. We'll get back to those guys. Anyway, in the meantime, the U.S. government is figuring itself out. We decided that our first constitution, the Articles of Confederation, kind of sucked, so we made the U.S. Constitution, which was a lot more powerful, and because it was a lot more powerful, it could actually hold a nation together, and so it was a lot better. Now, under this new constitution, the Congress passed the Navy Act, which allowed 6 frigates to be made for the U.S. Navy, which was finally allowed. It wasn't under the Articles of Confederation, but now that we have an actual constitution, we can make a navy. So we did that, and we completed 3 of them. The other 3 didn't get completed for complicated legal reasons, which kind of sucked. Now, in the Napoleonic Wars between France and Britain, Britain kind of realized, wait, hold on, we need to use the Americans for economic aid because Napoleon's a really good general. So they stopped stealing our ships, which was a thing they were doing, and they started working out some differences in Jay's Treaty in 1797. However, the French didn't like this very much, and they started doing even more raiding on U.S. ships to compensate for that. So, in order to figure out all this raiding stuff, President John Adams sent some diplomats over to France, but instead of actually negotiating, the French diplomats were like, hey, Americans, pay us money or we're not going to do anything, right? And a whole bunch of Americans were really pissed off about that. They were yelling like, the slogan to remember here is, millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. That's a really rich quote, when we've already been paying tribute to the Barbary pirates, but whatever, we'll get to them soon enough. Anyway, this whole deal with the demanding a bribe is called the XYZ affair, and it really pisses off the American public. In the wake of this, the American government authorizes seizing French ships in American coastal waters, and France starts doing a lot more of seizing American ships and impressment, and so what we end up with is called the quasi-war, because none of us actually declared war, but we are both doing a whole lot of war. So a whole bunch of that went on. There were some battles. None of them are really important, but let it be known that the U.S. won, and we made the French back off. Now, because of some unpopular stuff going on with the quasi-war, like some of the stuff that happened in the treaty that ended it, as well as just general, like, Americans not liking war too much, Jefferson, in his campaign, had sworn off doing too much war, which is great because he reduced a whole bunch of spending and sort of stuff, but it wasn't that great when the Barbary pirates, remember them, they started doing a lot more pirate-related things. There was one incident in which a naval captain bringing tribute was forced at gunpoint to bring it to another location, and afterwards, tribute payments were forced to go up. At this point, Jefferson stopped paying them, and so they declared war on the United States, and so the United States pretty much declared war right back. Now, we tried a couple blockades of Tripoli, and none of them were very effective, until we got Commodore Edward Preble involved. Now, don't ask me why they asked this on a test, but the soldiers serving under Edward Preble didn't like him at first because he was pretty strict. Eventually, they started liking him because he was good at his job. That's the entire story. At one point, he called them a pack of boys because they were all super young, and so they were all known as Preble's boys from then on. Anyway, he set a blockade on Tripoli, and it went really well, except for one incident, the Philadelphia incident. A frigate, Philadelphia, had actually ran aground at Tripoli and been captured, and the crew of the Philadelphia was being held for ransom. Now, Commodore Preble learned of this, and he was like, we need to do something about this, but he looked at it and he was like, this is too well defended to be recaptured. We can't get it back. but we don't want Tripoli to use the Philadelphia, so we're going to destroy our own ship. So he sends Lieutenant Stephen Decatur, as well as some people he was leading, on a raiding party. And so he does this actually pretty spectacularly. He gets in there, burns the thing down, and then gets right back out. And he does all this with surprisingly low casualties, given that all of this was done while under fire by the Tripoli pirates. And so when he comes back to the United States, everyone's like, wow, that's really cool. So he was given the rank of captain and a hero's reward, and he is the youngest captain in the history of the U.S. Navy. However, the war wasn't over yet, so there's still a lot of piracy stuff going on, and they have some captives. So we've got William Eaton, who's like, I've got a great idea. We're going to take a whole bunch of Marines, we're going to take a whole bunch of various Muslim and European mercenaries we've got, and we're just going to march from Egypt all the way over to Tripoli, right? And so he does, and he captures the place. And that won us the war. We managed to basically take over the capital, and we raised the American flag over it. And then we signed a treaty, but because of that treaty, first off, we had to pay a lot more money in ransom, and second off, we had to leave everyone there, so we took our guys back, but everyone else stayed behind. So that's all the mercenaries we had, as well as all of the everyone else we could round up, and then they were executed once we left. So that didn't go particularly well, but we did win that war. We weren't being harassed by pirates anymore, and that war in particular has been immortalized in the Marine Corps hymn in the line "To the Shores of Tripoli." Now we're all really happy about winning this war, but Britain is back at it again. They're doing a whole bunch of impressment, which means they're taking our sailors and forcing them to serve on other ships. And we're not happy about that. We tried to pass an embargo in order to prevent them from doing that, because we'd stop trading with them under the embargo, and that would be like enough of an economic slap on the wrist that they'd stop. But it didn't really work too well. So this British impressment inspires France to see if they can get us on their side, or more accurately, get us to like them a lot more. So Napoleon's like, hey, we're going to do a lot more trade with you, we're going to be a lot nicer, and his hope is that if Britain doesn't follow suit, we're gonna hate Britain a lot more than we hate France. And Britain doesn't follow suit, and so it works. And what we end up with is increased amounts of impressment until finally we end up at the War of 1812. Now, this war starts off going pretty well for the United States, but eventually Britain manages to push the French out of U.S. waters, and as such is able to pretty quickly gain control of the ocean. Now, things are going pretty bad up north. We've got a lot of British coming in down the Great Lakes from Canada until the arrival of Master Commandant Oliver Hazard Perry. And he basically pushes right back up, recovering a lot of U.S. land. The important things to know about this campaign is two important quotes that they like you to know. First off is Perry's. When he finally wins, he says, "We have met the enemy and they are ours." The other one is actually the dying command of Captain Lawrence, which is, "Don't give up the ship." There's some context, but it's not really crucial. You just need to know those two quotes and who said them. Now, the final thing you need to know about the War of 1812 is late on in the war, there was a British attack on Baltimore, and specifically Fort McHenry. And so they bombarded it over the night, but they had failed to actually capture it. And so when Francis Scott Key sees this from being captured in a British vessel, he's like, wow, I need to write a poem about that. And eventually, they put it to the tune of a drinking song, and it became the Star-Spangled Banner. Now, after the War of 1812, we're even more confident than ever, and we're like, wow, yeah, we can really fight some people. And so we start greatly expanding our sea power, and in particular, we set up a U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis, Maryland. There was a brief problem with piracy, but that was crushed by Commodore James Biddle and then Commodore David Porter in order. Now, Americans are starting to move into this hot new piece of land called Texas. Now, technically, Texas is under control of Mexico, but Mexico's just sort of letting people in. Pretty much the same thing was going on with California at the time. And so what both of these led to is that we had pretty much more Americans in the area than we had Mexicans, as well as we had driven out most real administration in California and Texas by Mexico, and so they were basically independent as is. So eventually, Texas was annexed by the U.S. and admitted to the Union as a state. The only problem with this is that they're still owned by Mexico, and so war breaks out. This is the Mexican-American War. Now, the first thing you need to know about the Mexican-American War is about the Alamo. Now, the Alamo wasn't actually during the war. It was about 10 years earlier, in the first sort of incursions, I guess, into Mexican territory. And in this battle, the Alamo, which was sort of a fortified mission, Santa Anna, a Mexican general, marched into that and sieged the place. And so all of the defenders were killed, including Jim Bowie and Davy Crockett, who were both kind of folk heroes at the time. And so that led to the phrase, "Remember the Alamo," as sort of like a, "We're Texan and we like independence" sort of catchphrase. The Mexican-American War was ended by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which basically set the Rio Grande as the U.S.-Mexico border, which also sort of said, hey, California and Texas belong to us now. This is supported by sort of ideals of manifest destiny going on at the time, where we were like, hey, it's our destiny to control the entire continent. The other thing you have to know about the Mexican-American War is that after we won, we stationed a whole bunch of soldiers over by an old Aztec temple, and so that's where the line "from the halls of Montezuma" in the Marine Corps anthem comes from. Next thing that happens is the development of clipper ships, which are especially fast trading ships that allow for a lot more international trade to be done over a lot longer distances. This allows a lot more trading with China as well as other Asian nations. In particular, Japan. Japan's currently engaged in an isolationist policy, but the U.S. is like, we want to do trade, so we send over the brother of Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry, Commodore Matthew Calbraith Perry, and we're like, hey, get them to open up their borders, and so he does. And so now we start doing a lot of trade with Japan. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Thank you all so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.